Welcome. You're listening to Literacy Now, the official podcast for the nonprofit organization Parents for Reading Justice, and I am your host, Brett Tingley. Hello, everybody. Today on Literacy Now, we've got Kait Feriante. I met Kait a few years ago when I began doing my work in Illinois, and she is a powerhouse. She's got the Redwood Schools. She's got a bunch of different amazing projects. I think it's fascinating, and I always like to confirm it when I talk to a teacher. I'm not an educator, so I don't know whether college education teaches science reading or not. We used to think that teachers did know and that they were withholding something from us. So it's fascinating to me to hear from a teacher that you really weren't taught how to teach kids how to read. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, no, I think, one, I've worked with lots of teachers, and I agree with you. Like teachers, folks go into education because they want to help people. That is the majority of my experience. Once in a while you meet somebody who you're like, this is not the right, space for you because you're not here for the right reasons. But, far and large, my experience is that educators care so deeply about their students and are there to really help them. And, you can get, I think all of us are prone to this across industries, right? We are taught something or we experience something and we can really hold on to it, especially if the people around us are also believing it and buying into it. And so just to reinforce what you said, I think teachers are doing the best that they can most of the time. But I do think there's a real gap especially around true decoding skills. So I went to Illinois State University. I recently visited, and I'll tell you about that visit because I went back to ask them this question, kind of to express like, hey, I graduated from your program, at that time in the state of Illinois for public universities. Illinois State had one of the best programs for special education. I remember that was one of the reasons I was excited about being in that program. They also had a great scholarship program that made it possible for me because I had really limited resources at that time in my life. So I had a great experience there, but when I got to my first classroom, I just didn't know how to actually teach a child how to read the word dog or cat. I knew I had a lot more strategies in my tool belt for helping them write about what they were reading or helping them, dig deeper into understanding the vocabulary around what they were reading. But as far as actually learning how to read a word off of a page, I didn't have the tools. And once I worked through the Wilson program, now on the other side of that, I went back to Illinois State and I said, here was my experience and what is happening now. And what I learned while I was there, I got to talk to two different professors who held really different opinions. And there was, even within the university, there were some pretty big conversations happening, really figuring out what do we think is the best approach for our teacher training program. And there was some disagreement, not disagreement in a negative way, but, there were different perspectives at the table. And I think as it was interesting to hear them describe that process. And I think I walked away, one, feeling relieved that there was a strong science of reading perspective present at the table. I think that was really encouraging to see. And also very curious about how, these conversations are going to take time, the amount of unlearning that needs to happen, and that, at the highest levels, and then for time for that to trickle down into actual classrooms, it's going to be a process.
So that is fascinating. One of the things that we have promoted at Parents for Reading Justice is that once you form a parent group and you flip your district to the science of reading, you take your district into the supplying colleges of education and you provide them customer feedback. So you say, we would like, we're spending too much on professional development. We're having to retrain everybody and your student teachers aren't really qualified to come into our classroom. So we're not going to be hiring at the same levels, but we want to help you if you'll move to the science of reading. And we've always thought it would be a fascinating. So that's kind of their product that comes out. But as a teacher, if you are also giving customer feedback to them, you are someone that pays them to go to school there. That is another really important voice that they should be listening to.
100%. I think it's through, through all the different perspectives, speaking their truth and giving that feedback. Because you make great points about, schools are spending so much on professional development, and teachers are so exhausted from having to learn, kind of learn and unlearn and learn and unlearn. And, teaching is a really energy intensive, draining job. And, I think we see the challenges that we need teachers right now, right? There are really not enough educators, and even educators who are not well trained to fill our classrooms. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of components that need to be shifted together in order to truly create sustainable change. If we just move one piece without really thinking through what impact that's going to have, and how to make the effort sustainable for the long term is really where the conversation needs to be. Because anything quick, anything one-sided is just it's not going to last. And it's going to use precious resources, both financial and time and energy, for educators and, educational systems that we just can't afford to waste.
I couldn't agree more. I've got an engineering background, so I look at things as a system. And if you want to fix the system, go to really the root of the problem. And so if we want to really go back, I contend pretty much every time I talk that colleges of education, and if you think about it, what is the one entity that should be keeping up with the science? What is the one entity that should be monitoring the latest research, what's going on? And so anytime that we come up with an idea to help them shift or move, we definitely explore that and try to exploit that. But I love the idea that parents, at first with a dyslexic kid, if you're in a district that doesn't know how to help them, there's a lot of, you kind of have to fight them sometimes, because they've been trained this way. They paid all this money, and teachers, parents have to get something for their kid. But once you realize that they're not being taught in the colleges of education, and our children are suffering because colleges of education aren't staying up with the science, you guys have paid all this money to learn everything, and you've basically been robbed. We can actually partner with teachers for the good of children. And that feels so much better. It's a realization.
You have to partner. And I think you use the term fighting. And now, I'm now a parent of a child with dyslexia. So I'm now walking, after a pretty significant amount of time and energy invested in this world through the educator lens, I'm now walking the journey as a parent, and it's really different. And I'm really grateful for the experience. I'm learning a lot through it. And just like you said, we're a part of a really wonderful public school system, amazing leadership, incredible teachers. And also we have had to really advocate and, have some difficult conversations and really push for things that I knew with my experience, my professional experience, that my daughter needed to be successful. And I've been able to, I started that journey very early because I anticipated that it was going to take a couple years just to get the right plan in place. And now I already see through my advocacy for my one child, there is change happening. And like I said, most educators I've worked with are wonderful people who just want to help kids. And so being able to, as we can teach each other, right? And I learn from them, what is realistic and what isn't realistic within their learning environment, because they're the experts of that space. And so it's that collaboration, a willingness to compromise, a willingness to see things from a different perspective, I think, that is really going to move this forward.
Parents for Reading Justice is a nonprofit grassroots movement dedicated to ensuring every child learns to read by engaging parents and educators in adopting the science of teaching reading. Please watch our award-winning film, Our Dyslexic Children, take our masterclass, and to ensure all our services remain free of charge, please consider making a donation today, all at parentsforreadingjustice.org. This is fascinating to me because and a friend of mine, Todd Collins, who's on the school board in Palo Alto, he said that school boards and district administration describe parents as meddling idiots because, they walk in and they say, oh, I've been looking on the internet and I read about this really. And they kind of go, well, we're the professionals. Please be quiet. Do you think it's an advantage to have been a teacher going in and making these suggestions to your daughter's teachers? Or how do you recommend a parent have that tricky conversation?
Well, one thing I'm learning just as a parent, even recently at my son's eye doctor appointment, I'm not an eye doctor. I don't know anything about the eye. I'm very reliant on their expertise, right, in the situation. And also, I'm the expert on my son, and they are not. And I think I've learned over and over as a parent that advocating for my child and owning that expertise of I know my child really well. I can read their body language, not perfectly, but pretty well. They share with me what their fears are, what their anxieties are, what their, greatest pride, feelings of success are. And so in these moments, I have the advantage, yes, of I have not just the teaching expertise, but now I've started programs. I've gotten to work with all sorts of amazingly talented people. I've learned so much. So I have a lot of expertise about dyslexia. And so, of course, both my husband and I have that. That's our advantage in these conversations. But I think not assuming that most parents don't have that expertise, right? If they're not in this as a professional as well, I think just having confidence that you know your child and being willing to question a system, not fight a system. Like I wouldn't recommend going in like this. And I think a big piece of advice is assume best intent. Like whenever we're having difficult conversations, assume best intent, assume that the school is on your child's team, that they're on your team. They want your child to be successful. And then also be bold and brave and prepared to ask really good questions of the system. Because I think I've experienced the most success in advocacy, both when I'm advocating for a student. I've done a lot of advocacy work in the state of Illinois, or for my own child through coming with really great questions and questioning the system and letting the evidence speak for itself, right? It's like if someone is saying this is working, but all the numbers show that it's not working, then use those numbers confidently to say, I appreciate your efforts. I hear what you're saying, but these numbers are saying something else. And here are the questions I have about the system that is producing these results. So assuming best intent and having really thoughtful, well-prepared questions ahead of time that you confidently present, I think have been my best. Those are tips I've experienced success from approaching these conversations that way.
So when I said sometimes you have to fight, so we definitely, in our own personal experience, our parent group definitely did assume best intent. And we worked, begged, pleaded, cajoled for a year until we had to fight. But then there comes a point when this is your kid's life. And we had to make that change. Consequently, most of the other districts around us that we've mentored, nobody else had to really fight too much. So, this brings up interesting part of, or what interests me about your work is that you are very comfortable, very familiar with data. And I think you use that really, really well. So what's some of the information, what's some of the data that you took into your school that was beneficial?
Yeah, so I've spent the last 2 years in my position at Redwood really focusing on data collection and analyzation in this area specifically of reading intervention for kids who have IEPs or who have an identified learning difference, or for students who just have not gotten solid instruction and just need extra support to get there. And a couple reflections from my deep dive into this data world. And to answer your question, data is really complicated. It's not, educational data is extremely complicated. I'll give you, and I would assume across industries, this is the same. So a very concrete example of that is, most schools and programs like Redwood look at 3 benchmark data points for each child across the course of the year. And even 3 it's hard to get those data points to actually happen for all students, just with all the factors that you have in a school system. And testing is hard on kids, and they're tested a lot. And it's a whole process that's complex, hard to do well. Then you get these 3 data points. And what if the child was, what if they had a bad fight with their best friend that morning? Or what if their mom and dad are going through a separation? Or so many things, right? What if their grandmother just got sick? And so you're looking at really limited data points that have so much nuance and context around them. Or just a lot of kids have anxiety these days. I think anxiety in children is, I think I've read pretty consistently recently that it's, higher than we ever have documented before. And having worked with students in the classroom and now watching my own child go through this journey, how she shows up in a day academically is very dependent on a whole slew of things. And also at the end of the day, for these kiddos whose brains are wired this way, they're never going to show truly what they know through this very limited construct that is word reference testing. It is very much stacked for a certain type of brain, and kids who are neurodivergent or who have some of these learning differences are just testing is not the way to capture their intelligence. Data is complex. I share all that to really highlight how complex data is. And then on the other side, we have to look at it and we have to respond to it. So if we have, some of the data points that Redwood is looking at all the time for this demographic of student, and that I recommend parents are really paying attention to and asking good questions around, is your child's independent reading accuracy. So how accurately are they reading words? And really, kids need to be reading at a 95% accuracy or higher to be set up for success, to truly understand what they read, which that's the whole point of reading. So if you're reading at a 69% accuracy, even an 85% accuracy, which isn't like that's pretty accurate. But even when you're at those levels, you are expending so much energy to just read the words on the page, and you aren't understanding what you're reading. And so then that's not successful literacy for that child, because it's not getting them to the end goal. So you're looking at that accuracy. It's crucial. It really needs to be 95% or higher. You're looking at fluency, oral reading fluency, which can be measured, through all sorts of different tests. It doesn't really matter, for the most part, how it's being measured, as long as it's an oral reading fluency score. And there are, easy charts that you can Google that tells you exactly where your child should be. If you have a student with a learning difference, they're probably always going to be on the lower side of that. And that's okay. They don't have to, that's one measure to look at. It's more like a thermometer to let you know, are there some underlying decoding or encoding struggles, or it's almost like, where does my child need support, or my child does need support? And then you're looking at, accuracy, fluency, and then you're looking at comprehension. And specifically for students who are still learning how to decode and encode independently, you really got to look at their language comprehension, which take the decoding out of it. So this is like, if something is read out loud to them, what are they able to understand? Or in conversations with adults, what are they able to understand and reflect back? So those 3 measures, accuracy, fluency, and comprehension, if any of those are really low, in the lower percentile ranges, we have to respond and say, this child needs some extra support here. And then how do we as a community do that in a way that's going to work? And how do we check to make sure it's working? And so I think that word respond is like the biggest, that we have to look at the data, even though we know it's imperfect, and we have to respond to it honestly, removing egos or removing beliefs about what should and shouldn't work, and really focusing on what is or is not working for that specific child.
Yeah, the data has to drive instruction. It has to mean something, and you have to do something as a result. It's not gathering data for data's sake. And people don't always keep that in mind. That kind of brings up a point that not every school is going to understand neurodivergent students as well as, say, a specialty school like Redwood. How does a family find Redwood, or does Redwood how does it interact as a private school? How does it interface with a public school?
Yeah, so Redwood, we're really trying to create lots of different models of the same thing. The core of what we do is partner with families and students to both support them through the process of just the dyslexia education journey, as well as making sure students have the independent skills that they need to be successful in their broader school experience. So we have a full day school program in Chicago called Redwood Day School. If you're in the Chicago area, it's an amazing school for kids with dyslexia. It's approved with the state of Illinois as a certified therapeutic day school. And it's a wonderful place. And we also know it's not a model that is very sustainable, and it's not a model that is usually accessible to most students. So it's a beautiful place for us to be able to do a lot of testing of new curriculums, figure out what is best practice, kind of bridging that gap between research and classrooms. I think it's a really nice kind of lab environment for that kind of work. And then we're wanting to get beyond that and push into the communities to have models that work for the kind of the broader audience of folks. So we have most of what we do is virtual these days. And actually the majority of our students receive our virtual services during the school day. So we're partnering with schools. So let's say a school has a special education vacancy to fill. They can hire Redwood to provide those certified legal IEP minutes during the school day to the children directly via, Zoom or Google Meets, various virtual platforms. And then we have an in-person implementation specialist we hire from the school community who knows that school well and can run the classroom, but doesn't have to have the structured literacy expertise. And the really powerful thing about this model, the reason I'm so excited about it is one, it's publicly funded. So it's coming from, families aren't having to pay extra for it. So it's more accessible, and it's also using public funds for educational purposes, which is why they're there, right? And then it's also allowing us to access expertise across the U.S. So I'm able to hire a teacher who lives in, rural Vermont to service students in Chicago. And it allows teachers to have, flexibility. They can make more money per hour. And it also allows schools who wouldn't have access to that teacher's expertise to get access to them.
Well, and one of the things that districts are famous for saying is, you can fight and get this IEP and everything, and they don't have the bandwidth. They do not have the personnel to do that. So I'd be interested in understanding about Wilson and the whole, phonemic awareness and everything online, kind of your experience with that. But this would alleviate that problem, because if they don't have them, they can certainly hire an outside expert who can.
Well, and it allows, it's not an extra cost for schools then. So if they can use funds that are dedicated for a special education teacher to hire Redwood, it's much more financially sustainable for the schools as well. And some parents have the virtual services to their children during the school day, even if the school's not paying for it. So we work with students that are publicly funded as well as privately funded. And I think the other bonus of being able to push into schools is that a lot of that teacher education can happen more organically, right? Teachers can see for themselves what we're doing, how we're teaching reading to students who are struggling to learn how to read, and they can see the evidence. We'll have teachers comment after we've been in a school maybe for 3 months. Like, I've noticed, this student is like raising their hand more in class, or they're volunteering to read out loud, which those kinds of growth can't be measured in a test, but it really I think those are some of the pieces that teachers see most quickly, right? A child's confidence being restored, a child being able to show the rest of what they know. So it's a really exciting model. I think it's definitely the direction Redwood is focused for as we look to the next 5 to 10 years, because it's checking so many boxes that I think are crucial in this effort to really make sure kids have access to what they need to be able to learn how to read.
Well, and the flexibility sounds amazing. I wish that's one good thing that came from the pandemic. We had no idea.
And to your question about virtual instruction, we've worked with an outside independent evaluator for the since our founding, and since 2020, which is when we started providing virtual services. There's no statistical difference between kids who have received our in-person services versus kids who've received our virtual services. On average, they're making just as much progress, and that's not just Redwood studies. I mean, if you read the research right now in this space around virtual instruction, and we're actually just starting our first controlled study with Johns Hopkins University this coming school year, because they're really focused specifically looking at virtual small group, intervention, because it is, the high dosage tutoring. We did learn a lot through COVID about how much is possible through this model. So it's a really exciting time. I think the bank of solutions is broadening in a really, and I think at a level that's going to be accessible to schools, which is exciting.
Yeah, that is great news. Oh, that's wonderful. One of the things that is most impressive about your work is what you're doing with the court-involved students. I was just fascinated by this. Can you share a little bit about Lawndale and what you're doing there?
Yeah, I'd love to. So Redwood has, for the last 4 years, we've partnered with Lawndale Christian Legal Center, which is a restorative criminal justice organization located in the Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago. And they've been there for a long time. I don't want to get the years wrong, but I think close to 20, 25 years. I think we all know in this space the overlap, right, between those that are involved in our court systems and literacy scores. It's estimated, as close to 80% of our nation's inmates cannot read well. And so, of course, there are a lot of factors at play, but this is a key component. If we want to see those numbers go down in our country, we need to be able to, like you said, address the root issues. And this is one of them. So we, Redwood really wanted to be able to provide, we are experts at teaching students how to read. And so by partnering with an organization who's an expert in supporting individuals who are going through the court system, we thought there was just a lot of, that partnership felt really exciting to us. So through the donation, the whole program's been funded for the last 4 years. We are having to pause it for this coming school year because we're still seeking ongoing funding for it. But it's a beautiful program and it's yielded incredible results. So the first 2 years it was in person. The second 2 years it's been virtual. And basically we match, clients who come into LC, if they are below the 30th percentile in their reading scores, they are referred to Redwood. They get paid minimum wage to come to class. So it's also a part-time job, which for many of these young people, they're maybe on probation or house arrest or, newly released, and they have to provide for themselves and their family, just like we all do. And so being able to make this something that adds resource to their life, both for the long term, learning how to read, as well as for the short term, meeting immediate needs, it's a really powerful pairing. And we saw attendance close between 80 and 90% consistently across all 4 years, which I'm really proud of. An incredible team at Redwood and Lawndale Christian Legal Center, so much ongoing troubleshooting and creative out-of-the-box thinking to make this program work. But every student who's participated with us has made documented significant academic growth, sometimes as many as 4 grade levels of reading growth in 1 year, just meeting twice a week. And this is why we have to get these programs and these approaches more accessible to young students in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, because I had my favorite story to tell from this program is I taught the first year of class in the Lawndale neighborhood. So I would go 2 evenings a week and get to spend 3 hours with these groups of young people. And about 3 months into the first class, a young man named Marquise, who was 25, 26, he interrupted my lesson. I was, doing some Wilson thing, and he stood up and slammed his hands on the table. But he said, "Why has no one ever taught me how to read like this? If I would have learned this in grammar school, I went my whole grammar school career thinking I was slow, thinking I couldn't learn. And here, I've just been coming to class a few months and now I'm learning how to read. Why did nobody tell me this before this point?" And I think that story is just a very concrete evidence for us in this educational, as educators, as advocates, as parents in this space, that the advocacy work we do for one student, like I'm doing for my daughter right now, if we, and all the good work that you're doing, Brett, with your organization, and just that collaboration, it's going to make such a difference for so many individuals. And I don't think anyone can argue that more people learning how to read makes the world a better place.
Well, and it is criminal that the information is there, the knowledge is there, and we are not doing it. It is criminal. So I agree with him. I think it's interesting too that you're paying the students to come, because ideally you would think, they're learning to read, so they should just be happy. But the reality is that it allows them to learn to read, because otherwise they might have to be working. So to be in the moment and to be creative and to do what is necessary, because what you want to do is teach them how to read by whatever means necessary. So I think that's brilliant. And do you have any data about recidivism? Like if somebody goes into prison and they can't read, but you teach them to read, I think there's some really good stats about recidivism.
Yes, there's strong research outside of Redwood to show that how much literacy can play a part in reducing recidivism, in keeping folks out of jail and keeping folks out of the court system.
Yeah.
And we at Redwood, we have a limit. I think we have about a little over 30 individuals who have participated across the 4 years. So it's a really small group. So we don't have any, data that can be published or anything like that. But what we've seen informally in our programming across the last 4 years is about 25% of the participants have been either killed by gun violence or involved in gun violence, a victim of gun violence, if not fatal, since, we've known them. We've lost several students. Mm-hmm. And about 25% have gone back into the court system in some way. And about 50% have really broken the cycle, right? So we've got folks who have gotten their first jobs, moved out of the city, really gotten married, had babies, like really been able to achieve something for themselves, that they achieve a sense of peace and achieve a sense of we have what we need, not without struggle, of course, but at a new level and a level where, we'll get calls like, hey, just had a baby, FaceTime, get to meet the baby. So, I share those stories as it's the reality that all, this work doesn't have fairy tale endings all the time. And that is the continual tragedy that we need to do better. We need to learn from what the data is showing and do better. And also this work is so at any point, at any stage in an individual's life, learning how to read is life changing. It's always life changing. Whenever it happens for you, if it comes easily to you, if it takes you years to get, I've worked with a 66-year-old who never learned how to read and wanted to be able to read to his grandbaby. And so he worked with us for a couple of years to build those skills, and it was life-changing for him. So it's never too late, I think, is the point that I'm trying to make. But also, we need to do better, because it gets more and more complex, and it can really wreak a lot of havoc on someone's life to not have those reading skills.
Yeah, it's there's so much emotional damage that's done. And mental health becomes an issue. And so that this whole thing has really just emphasized that we need to find these kids early. We need to intervene early to prevent the emotional distress and, prevent kids from going into the criminal justice system. You talked about an adult that you worked with. I recently had a good friend who is an adult who is probably dyslexic, just sort of realizing that. And it's incredibly difficult to find services for adult struggling readers. What do you recommend that people do?
Well, Redwood works with adults frequently. One of the the biggest barriers we run into with adult services is oftentimes if you don't have literacy skills, your income is also more limited. And so just the amount of financial resource that you have to put towards intervention. And also as an adult, right, we have all sorts of different costs in our life that we have to pick and choose. We can't always, get all the things that we need. And so that's something we run into, and Redwood has struggled to figure out, that our more accessible price point is when we can do small group instruction. That's really where the majority of our program models really are built around small group instruction. But adult small group instruction is trickier because adult schedules are also usually more limited, and you want it at that point in the intervention process, you want to individualize it exactly to that adult. Like, what are your goals? Why do you want to learn how to read? It becomes really individualized, especially in your, for adults. So it's a little bit trickier to do the small group intervention. But I mean, we work with adults all the time, and we've had folks who came in with really specific goals. Like, I want to go back to school. I just found out I had dyslexia, but I want to go back to grad school. We have a lot of growing support around assistive technology tools at Redwood because I've had an incredible assistive technology team the last several years who've taught me a lot about how important assistive technology, not just access, but training and instruction and ongoing coaching support is. I mean, it just can completely change the game for students with dyslexia. And students, I mean, for all students, but especially students who learn differently and where that two-dimensional work is just so taxing. But I don't know of another resource for adults outside of Redwood, and especially a resource where the price point is really accessible for someone who's in that position. But it can be life-changing at any point. It's definitely worth the investment of time and resource for adults. That's been my experience.
I'd like to ask another question. You just brought up assistive technology, and that's always a tricky thing because you want to introduce assistive technology, but you don't want to introduce it too early before the child gets all the basic foundational skills. So first of all, like, when do you introduce assistive technology? And what are some of the best assistive technologies in your opinion right now? Because I think it's something that you might be able to get on an IEP, but they'll put it on, but they don't really train. So they'll just give you access to it. And it's left to the parent oftentimes.
So I'll use my daughter as an example because this last year I did a lot of advocacy for my daughter in her public school, and she was in second grade last year, and to me, second grade did not feel too early, and I'll tell you why. For her, I mean, I'll tell you a story that will illustrate why. So, the beginning of her second grade year, she went in and she had really extreme anxiety about going to school. And it just progressively got worse through her second grade year to the point where she was not speaking really in class at all. And this was so different from how she had showed up in first grade and how she shows up at home. And so, we were already aware as a family, but just, if you see your child have anxiety about going to school and see it kind of progressively get worse throughout the school year, it's, please consider that there is oftentimes something academic that's going on that's, and of course there are other factors as well, but it's a red flag that parents need to pay attention to, even though it can be overwhelming sometimes to figure out where to start. But the advocacy process for my daughter, what my husband and I quickly realized is the first thing we needed to make sure we were helping to protect in her and restore was her self-confidence, because we saw that just start to go downhill. And so before, she was in regular intervention. I tried working with her for about a year, and then now a Redwood virtual instructor works with her during the school day just because I wanted to preserve my mom-daughter relationship with her. And for us, it just felt like it was too much. And now it's during the school day, so we're not having to do it before or after school. So it's better for everybody. But so I made sure she was getting the intervention through, she's doing the spellings program for that. Again, that decoding and encoding, accuracy and fluency, the foundation, like you're saying, those foundational skills. And also, once that's in place, assistive technology really at any point can help restore that confidence, and it can help show this, like the earlier, I mean, especially think about, my kids are generation alpha, and what's predicted of this generation, I don't think it surprises any of us, is that they're going to be the most reliant and the most tech savvy out of any generation. So our kids are already, I mean, the digital age is upon us, whether we like it or not. And so digital literacy is now just as crucial in some ways as decoding, your ability to read words independently, because it's the way of the future. It's how you're going to be, how your school setting is going to be functioning, so how many professional settings function. And so giving my daughter access to that digital literacy from an early age and starting to build those categories in her brain, even though I'm not looking for her to have total mastery of tools yet, to me and my husband, that was a decision that we made to start that journey really early. And the story I'll share, and I'll land on this, is after, the really tough start to her second grade year and her anxiety being really high and not wanting to go to school, a lot of self-confidence issues, I showed her how to use Google Dictation, and her school partnered with me on this, how to use Google Dictation to write a paragraph, just to respond to a question. And she wrote, her first stab at it, she wrote like a whole paragraph, like a half a page of text. And then I pushed the, read back button, and it was very imperfect because it had just been her dictation. She'd never done it before, but her whole posture changed. Her eyes lit up. She was like gut laughing. She's like, Mom, I wrote all of that. I just wrote all of that. I can do it now. And so just that one moment was worth, it's not like she's doing all of her assignments on Google Dictation. We're still working on the handwriting. Of course, I use the analogy of a train track. You need the intervention, but you also need the accommodation at the same time. And if you focus too much on one and not both at the same time, I think the student is missing out. So it's a really important part of the puzzle. And I think for lots of students, it just gives them a lot of confidence and then energy and time back, which just can increase their joy of learning so much.
Well, and that's one thing that is commonly said, is that dyslexia robs you of time over and over. So, well, I could talk to you all day long, but we normally close with a question. This podcast is the only podcast that I'm aware of that is specifically designed with parents of dyslexic and struggling readers in mind. And so we always like to ask, do you have any advice for those parents? What's something that you want them to know before we let you go today?
Yeah, I think to any parent of a neurodivergent child, whether that's dyslexia or just, any wiring of the brain that feels like what is expected of them in the school space is harder for them, be really kind to them and yourself in this process, because there can be embarrassment on the parent's side. There can be shame, and my child's struggling. I don't know how to help them. I mean, overwhelm. It's exhausting. I mean, I've got 3 kids. Having 3 kids in school is a part-time job, and it's in, most households that I know have 2 working parents, and it's a lot. It's hard. So being gracious with yourself and with your child, and remembering that the school system is one. It's where they spend their foundational years. But it's not the way the world works. There's a lot more flexibility outside of what the school says your child needs to be, what standards they need to be meeting or how they need to be showing up. And so especially as the parent, walking the process with patience and gentleness, and remembering that, helping your child find what are their strengths, where do they come alive? Where do they feel successful? Where do they have gifts and unique abilities that other kids their age don't have? And how do we really foster those first and foremost? Because those are going to be the things that your child relies on to guide them through their life. Just like we all find our strengths and use our strengths to guide us, and then get them the support that they need for the parts that are hard, but recognize it's going to take time. It's okay that it takes time. It's going to be up and down and all around. And you and your child and your relationship are much more than that fight, than that challenge. So I think that big picture thinking and being able to go do the important advocacy work and get them the support that they need 100%, that is so crucial. And also taking moments where you're leaning outside of that and just enjoying who your child is. Because I have found both as a parent and in my work with families that it's seeing your child for who they are that brings energy, that ongoing energy that you need to help make sure they get what they need to be set up for success.
Very wise words from an educator and a mama. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on today. We really enjoyed it. Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.